Caroline.
Hello.
There. Welcome in. So I've got a poll. I'm going to put the poll up in just a minute. So we can start to take some votes on that, on the topics to discuss. What are you here for today? What are you hoping to learn?
Your mic is very quiet.
Ooh, that's not very useful. How about now?
Yeah, much better.
Much better. Good. What are you here to learn, Caroline?
Hello,
Raphael.
Yeah, a bit of on prioritizing backlogs and making sure we always have things in the backlog and don't run out of work to do.
Yeah, very good topic. So hopefully we'll be covering that. Hello, Raphael. How are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. And you, Ian?
Good, good. I'm good, thank you. 99% recovered from COVID now, thankfully.
A good score.
Yeah, I've got a good score, yeah. Anders, hello. Lauren, hello. Maxime, hello. And Ronnie. Hello,
Hello.
Ronnie. Ronnie, I didn't have you on my list. You must have a mysterious email. Welcome in.
I shared, she's my colleague, so I shared the link with her.
Right, that'll be why. Perfect. Well, welcome in. Right, I'm going to share the poll. So I'm going to share a poll. It's a poll of one question. You should see the poll on your screen now. Is that right? No. If I hit the launch button, how about now? Now do you see it? Excellent. You have 3 points to spend. So last time I did 5 points. This time I'll do 3 points. Please just tick the top 3 most interesting questions to you, or say loudly if you think we're missing something desperately important. And hello, Tom. I see you there as well.
Hey, everyone.
So this call is being recorded, the same as the previous session, and it will be shared on my newsletter afterwards when I do the write-up. So don't say anything you don't want those to other people, but of course you don't know everyone else in the room anyway, so you're not going to share anything too private. The purpose here is to share some experience and knowledge amongst those of us on the call. So I'll be writing this up and putting it onto the onto my newsletter afterwards, and it will take a few minutes, I think, for the poll to settle down. I roughly ordered it the same as I did last time by the order that I think is probably of more interest to everyone, and we'll see how that settles. I'll give you a little bit of background. So at several conferences, I've been running a session called Executives at PyData. So that's at the PyData conference series at PyDataLondon here in London, and at PyData Global, so the virtual online one, and a couple of other events over 6 years. And they've gone really well. And the whole point of these sessions, the executives, is to say, right, forget about the machine learning, the statistics, whatever the tools of the trade are. Think about running projects that go right rather than go wrong, because lots of our projects go wrong. I've got a course called Successful Data Science Projects. I'm running one in a few months' time. I've been running that for years because I work with a lot of teams who had explosions and everything went wrong. And so I've been trying to figure out ways to make our projects go right. And then these calls, one that I did a month ago and this one, are a continuation of this theme, trying to dig into the topics around which leaders face challenges, so we can share some knowledge, and then I can write it up on my newsletter, and that'll feed into future executives at PyData events and whatever, however I can develop this. But the goal is to flush out the questions and then develop some answers around all of those questions. So as I mentioned, the video is being, or this call is being videoed and recorded, so that'll be shared afterwards. So the poll seems to have settled down. So I think the top topics that we'll start off with appear to be how do you estimate project value for novel projects with many unknowns? A topic close to my heart. I'm actually facing that challenge with a couple of colleagues, Raphael and Maxime, who are on the call right now, and we'll be looking at that. So that's super interesting to me. How do you discover projects for the backlog? Another one that's super interesting to me. And then the other topics there that have been well voted. So how do you estimate a timeline for new projects? Yep, you need to figure out what it looks like. How do you decide to continue or cancel a project? Incredibly important for R&D. And what are the effective ways to run projects based on laggy metrics? Yes, one of the submitted questions. So when your metrics will tell you in 6 months' time whether you've had an impact, how do you convince people to go along for that journey? So I'm going to end the poll, and then I think I can just share that in a web browser for me, view results in a browser. So I can stay on top of that. And then, there you all are. I'm going to change you to the gallery view for me, but I think the video just shows whoever's speaking. So let's start. Oh, just put your hands up first of all if you were in the previous call, so you know how this all works. Who was in the previous call a few weeks ago? Yeah, so about half of you, not even half of you. Excellent. So this works very simply. It's a free-form open discussion. I'll facilitate. We'll do 10, 15 minutes each on the top questions and work through them. When you speak first, please introduce your name and then either the company you work for or at least the vertical that you're in. So we've got an idea as to where you are in the world, or where you are in terms of your work in the world. So let's open up with how do you estimate project value for novel projects with many unknowns? I have answers to this, but this is not for me. This is for all of you. So I'll chip in, but I would like either someone to give us an example of what they're having difficulty with, or even better, start talking about how do you estimate project value. You don't have to hold your hand up. You could use the button to press the holding hands up, but really I prefer you just spoke. Pretend we're all in the same room. It's much easier that way. And don't mind if you overtalk somebody else. It's fine. We'll figure that out. I'd much rather we talked rather than went silent. With that, I'll shut up. Somebody tell me, how do you estimate value for novel projects? And if no one's going to go, I'm going to start nominating people.
I could jump in. So for a project that we recently worked on, it was sort of like a pricing model. We were trying to figure out what the right pricing was. I'm Ben Miller. I work for Bonterra, which works in the nonprofit market. And instead of pricing, it's actually donations. But we were acting, what was the right ask amount? And it was not something we had done in the past, so it was novel. And the approach that we took was to sort of figure out, okay, how many people are actually donating across our system? What would be sort of nominal increase if we could increase the amount raised by a nominal percent, like 1%, nothing out, crazy. And then that would give us a baseline of, okay, this is the potential value we might see if we're able to enact this model.
How did you estimate that?
So, like as an example, if we had 1,000 donors and they were donating $25 on average, we estimated a 1% to 2% increase in that donation as a baseline for like what we might be able to get the value. So we had to take a shot in the dark to some degree, but didn't want to make it 25% increase. Just look at the 1% to 2% and see what that looked like against cost. And if that, it just gave us a point to look,
Okay, so you made a model, you took some a gut feel, and then you used that to guide yourself forward without taking too big a leap into the unknown. Sounds pretty sensible. Who else has had to face this challenge, and what have you done?
Well, we always lean on agile methodology. You can't estimate the future. That's not how the future works. We've all been pretty, well, we all talked about this about COVID, but you have to take it sprint by sprint. And at the start of the sprint, you set out what is it you're going to do for the next sprint. And then you inspect and adapt. So you
make it sound so easy.
And then it's really not that hard for the teams. The problem is for management to accept that that's okay, because it's about loss of control for management. Like that's why they want that big number, right? Because they want you to go and defend your project from all the other execs who want your team to do something else. For the teams themselves, that's what makes most sense, especially in data science projects, where again, there are so many unknown parts to it. How can you even begin to say like what's going to happen in a year's time if you're doing like recommendation engines, or if you're doing churn or something like that, where you're going to have payoff way down the line? You have to live sprint to sprints, because that's all the feature that you have to work with.
Right, but one of the challenges is I can spend my resources in 3 different ways, which is the way that's most likely to pay off and either win a certain amount of money or most likely not to fail. So I get some kind of return and I learn something useful, or get us close enough to the management's crazy new planned direction, even though the machine learning won't solve any of the management's problems, but gets me close without blowing up or whatever. So I've got to make a prioritization choice. So it's not as simple as saying, I think it's not as simple as saying, I'll just use an agile estimate as an engineer and data scientist. It's much more about, well, what's likely to work, what's likely to fail, what the payoffs could be, what the explosions could be, and then how do I rank it? That's how I think about it, at least. Is that how your team has taken it, Anders?
Well, we sort of decide from sprint to sprint what exactly is going to be worked on in that sprint. So if we, after we've done sprints, we get the feedback, and then we say, oh, we can tell that if we don't start touching this area over here, the management is going to blow up. Or if we don't touch this over here, then we can see that there's going to be some other issues. So we do kind of pivot from sprint to sprint. So we don't make like one decision about what's going to happen. But also, a bit of background, like we don't really do projects either. I mentioned in the last call as well, but we do more of a value stream oriented. A data scientist is just another team member in a value stream, in the same way that a GUI person is, or a UX person is, or a designer, or anyone else. So we don't have those big bad projects. Yeah.
One question. I'm Raphael from Health Insurance. And I'm wondering, like, in that model, don't you have conflicts between the different value streams? Like a data scientist could work on different value streams. How would you decide? Aren't you like planning ahead and say, yeah, this is where we want to invest a data scientist resource, or do you have enough?
So we did that through self-organizing. So every few months, we all got into a big room, and each value stream talked about what they were going to be, like overarching principles that they were going to be looking at for the next session, and then people will self-organize into the teams that sort of made sense for what they were interested in and what they thought they could bring value to.
Okay, because yeah, that's a good position to be in. We kind of have to defend our projects every 6 months almost, and there's a lot of competition and ideas of things that people want to get done. So for us, it's always like R&D projects. How do you defend them in an environment like that? Because in a very you need to deliver. You need to promise something. You need to promise big in order to get the time and the resource to do it. But at the same time, you don't want to overpromise, because then it puts everybody under pressure, and it's just you don't look good also at the end when you can't deliver. So I think that's also at least for me, it's kind of where I'm trying, and Jan is working with us at the moment. We're trying to kind of figure out how can we get good enough estimate on an R&D with high risk, but at the same time not just inventing a number.
So Anders, I'm going to switch off you in just a minute, but yeah, I'd like you to say how different your organization is. In this organization that Raphael's talking about, it's a traditional hierarchical management with long-term plans, kind of waterfall driven. How does that reflect on your organization?
Oh, that's me?
Yeah, sorry, Anders, how does it reflect on yours?
Yeah, and that's what I started saying, is that for us it's more about a management issue. So for us, the management let go. It was very much let the Scrum teams, the Agile teams work, and then do management by walking around instead. So we didn't have top down, we're going to work on this project. It was more overarching themes that the various what we call them, teams worked on.
Did you go through the transformation? Did you go through the transformation from pyramid to what you're describing here, and how did that even work?
Yeah, so we went through transformation while I was there. So it was before we really kicked off like data science in a big way in my organization. But it was one of the sort of liberating factors in really getting data science working in the organization. Before it was very classic enterprise. It was financial services. So you can imagine traditional Java shop. And we were really given the opportunity to do this.
So that's really cool. I want to hear some other. Well, Raphael, if you got, I think we should leave it, and we'll see who else has got an opinion here. I don't know if Lauren or Lorna or Caroline, one of you has a view on this, because you must be all tackling this in different guises.
Well, we do struggle with that because it's a very new.
Can you say which organization you're at, Caroline?
It's at iTech Media,
which is some kind of consulting group.
No, it's an affiliate marketing company, and so we build like websites for various different industries. So data science is quite new in the company, and the team I'm at, we're basically developing like proof of concept projects that then get handed over to other teams to fully develop it. So what we've been trying to do is, most of the time, it's about optimizing processes that already exist and are done manually by analysts. So we've been trying to sell it as in saving analyst time. It's not always that easy to quantify. So because each analyst will take a certain amount of time to do things, but if it takes them like maybe 3 days to do something pretty much manually, and we can build a model that will do it in a few hours, then that's our selling point, really. That's been how we've been doing it so far. It's a lot more difficult when we're trying to build something, to do something that is not currently done in the company, but they would like to try, and data science is kind of the only way of doing it. And so that's the bit where we kind of struggle to identify the value. Yeah.
And it is that bit where we haven't done it before, we don't know what the value is, and there's high uncertainty, and we have to convince people to sign off budget. That is a very tricky area, and I'm dead interested in that because in data science, all those extra uncertainties make it all the more interesting. Let's take another view. Maybe Lauren or Lorna or one of you have a view to share on this, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Sure, just quickly, I actually work with Ben, and so Ben has been our data science team of one for quite a while now at Reaction Bonterra, and we are now going to build out that data science. I'm the second hire, right, on the data science team, so it's going to be part of the reason for joining this call is that we do want to see what other teams are doing successfully, or maybe avoid some pitfalls as we plan out our data science roadmap for the first time.
So Ben, how have you prioritized things? Just to finish off Lauren's point then, if Lauren's helping to build this out and you've been doing this, how have you been choosing the right projects?
Well, for us, because we are so, in our infancy, and as Lauren described, it is just me, or it was been until now, it was more finding the product managers that would see the value. And so it was really convincing different product managers of the value. My company was purchased. We had 10 or 13 predictive models, and then we integrated them into the company that we're in now. But trying to gain traction within the larger organization to try to buy into new predictive models has been challenging. And we've been trying to find interested parties and have found maybe one or two. I think there's usually a couple people that are more numbers focused in an organization, and finding those people, and then they can be your advocates. But it's been a struggle so far to get any data science into the product. So we haven't had to prioritize because all we've been doing is trying to get something in.
Okay, so I mean that's going to neatly take us on to how do you discover projects for the backlog. I'm just going to say on that previous point, how do you estimate value? I think there is a big undiscovered country here, particularly in large organizations, where you need to figure out how much time people spend. So let's forget blue sky crazy projects of just making something better. Who's doing stuff already? How many people are doing it? How much time is invested in it? How much money flows through that team? So if you automated 10%, how much money would you liberate for the organization or upsell possibility or whatever it is? And then how do you build some kind of credible estimate out of that that's defensible enough that you can go to your bosses and they will go, yeah, all right, you kind of understand enough of the business process. And that's not a data science problem at all. There's no data science in that process. That's all talky going off to other managers and the product owners, as you mentioned, Ben, and trying to pull that knowledge out of them to see where the value might be. Because it's not just my estimate of value, it's also the realistic estimate of if we actually make a change, what kind of change can we receive into the organization? How much can it absorb? Can we do something with it? And so I'm always dead keen to keep talking about this topic. I think this is the number one blocker for actually getting the right data science projects going in the first place. But we should move on. Let's step on to how do you discover the projects for the backlog? Because there, if you've got a nice pool of potential projects, then you can start estimating, and some will be quick and easy to estimate and some quite hard, but hopefully you get a nice potential stream of projects to work on, and then you can prioritize if you can do your estimations. But finding those projects, particularly in a large organization or an organization like if you're consulting into it, and then you just don't know who's out there, that's really hard to sell. So how do you go and find those projects? Who'd like to go first there?
I can start.
Please, Tom.
I'm Tom. I work for Delivery Hero, who's a food delivery company, headquarters in Berlin. I would say one thing that I've found, pretty fruitful is just kind of making informal networks, actually, which is, a bit of a kind of woolly answer in some ways. But recently I met someone at a kind of a work drinks thing and found out, oh, hey, you actually work with like this kind of textual data to do with our riders, which is the kind of the bread and butter specifically for my team and the kind of data science projects that we work on. And then we had a hackathon coming up, so I kind of, messaged Katya and said, well, could you, maybe we can do something about this. And then sort of 2 or 3 more, she said, hey, talk to this person. And they did something about like this. And so I spoke to a data analyst in their team. And then the data analyst passed me to a product manager who, it turns out, has been wanting to kind of kickstart a data science project on this for a couple of months already, and basically had a design doc, but they haven't kind of, taken that step yet to have the conversation with probably a manager 2 steps up from where I am, to kind of get that stuff passed down. So, that kind of building stakeholder buy-in in kind of soft ways is quite a good one, I would say. And also just more generally, getting a real, I mean, maybe this does definitely work in like Delivery Hero is a big organization. You just need to know more about the business, and you can be, separated from the concerns of the business because it's so big and you just don't know what people do. And so then you can't help. There's 2 sides, right? Because there's like a business person knows what the problem is, but they don't necessarily know what data science tools could be useful for what problems. And maybe you can't solve the problem that they have, but maybe you can help them see that something else is a problem which could be useful to solve for them. And I find like that really is best kind of done through conversations and a bit of informal work up front.
Yeah, so Tom, I totally agree with the notion of informal networks. I think that's incredibly important, just walking around the building when you can walk around the building, and go and talk to others. I think building those networks, that's going to be one of the, I'm guessing, something we're going to hear from other people. Who else wants to share how you find a good backlog?
I can jump in.
Lorna.
So, hi everyone, Lorna. I work for a subscription dog food company, so like mostly online consumer goods. I think echoing quite a lot of that as well, actually, like within the business, kind of knowing, just keeping an eye, an ear to the ground or something about what other people are doing, what people find hard. Some things that have worked actually pretty well is a little bit of like data science PR with people who you don't speak to that much. So like jumping into monthly team meetings, show and tell sessions, stuff like that, be like, hey, we did this really great project with the loyalty team about retention, you know, here are the types of things that we can do, just because with people you might not have worked with that much, they might not know who you are and you might not know what they can do. And I've always found from that kind of, you know, spin-off conversations always happen, because as soon as you plant an idea of like, oh, this is a thing we can do, it usually triggers, you know, it's a good place to try and trigger that thought in someone else's mind. So that's really good. To be honest, PyData meetups and similar, I'm not just like saying that because Ian's cool, but like genuinely just, you know, nosing about what other people are, you know, case studies that other people have worked on, things that have worked there can always trigger ideas about what you can do. And then obviously always, if you've done something cool that you think is kind of novel, sharing that back in those situations so that you can, you know, pay it forwards a little bit to somebody else. So yeah, for me, I think it's a little bit of like, okay, what are some ideas that other people have put into businesses from like a bottom-up approach, and then also like a kind of I guess a top-down from like, okay, what do people care about where I am, and where are people finding their jobs hard, which, you know, might then be able to be made easier with data.
Thank you very much, Lorna. So I love the idea of data science PR. I love that term, actually. One thing I've done with teams who are distributed, so data science teams that are distributed, is get them to experiment with something like a show and tell every month. Everyone shows off a 5-minute demo, like a little lightning talk on what they're doing, to spread knowledge in the data science team, try to bring in some other people to see some of that, and at the same time have something like a public Slack channel in the organization where you can show stuff off, and then you invite in other project owners, and then they can just look at some of the diagrams that are being posted. And I always say, look, if you make a diagram just self-contained, it's got a chart, there's a line going up to the right, the numbers get bigger as you go to the right, and there's just enough text annotation to explain that you're doing something positive, someone will ask questions about it, and it'll be someone you never expected who comes and asks questions. And so that's an asynchronous discovery mechanism to let knowledge slip out into the organization, totally informal presentation of these things, but just to find the right people and help sort of gently bring them in. And again, it comes back to that informal network building. Who else has got an approach that's working?
Just add on to that one. Oh, sorry.
Oh.
No, go ahead.
I just want to say that we call them BVIRs, big visual information radiators. We stick our office walls with everything because, yeah, it lets people come by and ask questions. The other thing that we did that really works is mandated co-writing. So either go sit in the contact center, take calls together with a call center operator, go ride with the claims assessors, go ride with your salespeople. That actually generated a lot of good stuff for us as well.
So for de-risking, I totally believe in put your data science on that phone call and make them listen to just how bad it is talking to members of the public when you're trying to build a model to automate something for the call center people. I mean, absolutely. But yeah, certainly for building those networks again, that's a brilliant idea. And you called it a big mutual information radiator.
A big visual information radiator.
Big visual information radiator. So I love that. So some
AVR.
organizations, I say, look, let's go and put diagrams on the wall. And they say, no, we've got a policy of nothing on the wall. The paintwork must not be touched. But this is this advertising space to share wonderful diagrams that will get people talking to us, but we're not allowed to do it, which is stupid. I'm glad your organization.
That's how we really got executives talking about the blockers that we had. Was put them in the wall.
Excellent. But Anders, you shared just before someone else was going to share. Was it Caroline?
Caroline, yeah.
Yeah, it's me. I was gonna say we created a page that everyone had access to where they could just put in their ideas for potential data science projects. It's kind of like our ideas backlog, and then we can have a chat with them about that. That worked reasonably well. It was a little bit chaotic at first because we kept getting all these ideas that were quite random and didn't really have a use case or stakeholders, so we had to chase that up. But it's something there we can work with. But yeah, I liked it when you mentioned we also have like a public Slack channel where people can come and have a look at what we're doing and ask questions and so on. It's starting to pick up now, but still there's not a lot of awareness at the moment.
Okay, that's nice, Caroline. Does anyone else have any techniques for building up that backlog? I think one point of resistance I've seen is organizations having gone through the data science is the sexiest job of the 21st century cycle, the hype, and then the disappointment on the other side of it, leading to a lot of people being a little bit burned by either getting involved or getting sidelined and then discovering, hey, these teams never deploy anything anyway. It's all a waste of time and money. And then trying to convince people that, yeah, actually, there's a lot of groundwork. We talked in the last session about the data maturity side of an organization. And if it's not mature enough to support projects, you've got to fix that. You've got to fix the data before you can do the data science. And so helping an organization grow and mature is incredibly important so that you can enable that. So does anyone else have any observations on building a good backlog around that? If not, we'll jump on. Lauren, how do you find it? Because you have to go into organizations and help them figure this out, right?
Me?
Lauren, yeah.
No, actually, I mean, I've been contracting, yes, but I've been very much embedded into Ben's team and the wider engineering group.
Okay.
Yeah, it's I've been lucky to not have to shop around for too many different clients and help too many different people with this. But yeah, I love the idea. I'm just taking some notes on some of the ideas that I've heard so far, right? Like that there's a PR process to this, right? That you have to market that data science exists, show the value. I love the idea of an open Slack channel, right? Where people can take a look. I also made a note for myself, like a Jira tag, right? Is a good way to kind of, at least within our group, it seems to be the way that people like to see things, is if they can check on Confluence or Jira epics to see what you're doing.
People like Jira.
People like it at our group. Yeah, it's
crazy.
It's transparent process. Well, it helps with like a remote first kind of team, right? I mean, there's only so many things. We can't take each other out to happy hours, unfortunately, to chat about our work. So, but yeah, I think that's probably within the engineering team that helps with the transparency. But there's still going to be, like, when you're building up a backlog, you need to create those partnerships with people that can champion and advocate for your work, right? So getting to know the different departments, I think, is still going to be a challenge here, beyond creating a Jira. And so maybe a Slack channel, I think that's a great idea.
One thing I saw, so I went to, I did a company internal presentation late last year for used to be an in-person, then with COVID went remote, and then a lot of the hires happened during COVID. And so the data science teams didn't know each other and they wanted ways to work better. And one thing they did there, so we had a bunch of discussion forums that were nice and fine, and we did some presentations, but they also did a poster session, so a remote poster session across all the distributed teams, effectively 5-minute lightning talks on the things that they were doing, but where I think the chats were asynchronous and they shared, I guess, some Confluence pages or wiki pages or something with some nice diagrams and write-ups. And then the feedback afterwards was that was the hit for all of this mini internal conference, was letting these distributed teams who weren't aware of what everyone else was doing just learn by virtue of seeing these well-contained presentations. You could skim it in 5 minutes and then follow up with a call. So that was kind of enlightening, because poster sessions at conferences work really well when you're walking around. The idea of doing it in an organization to your fellow data science members, certainly interesting. I've not seen it in an organization where we do effectively poster sessions, but for all the product owners. Anders, go on. How has that worked?
Yeah, so we did pretty aggressively demos end of every sprint, and then every quarter we would do poster sessions for all the value streams. So basically, it was an opportunity for everyone to we did lightning rounds, as you said, where everyone took turns going to each other's stands and hearing about what's gone well, what's gone bad. Doing PR for your team, because remember, there's also self-organizing. So if you're able to do some good PR, then you manage to get the right people you need for your teams, and that worked really well. That was again, this is all pre-COVID and all in person, so I haven't tried to distribute it.
All right, so okay, that's at least that's my crazy idea, but validated. You've actually done it and it worked. I'm surprised I haven't thought of pushing that in teams before, because it seems obvious. I've thought about it data science to data science teams, but not to the wider org. I will push on that idea more with a couple of teams. Okay,
let's do a bit more of those crazy things.
Say again?
Because we did some of the more crazy things like testing voice recognition on phones. Like you could float the idea, and then you get customer service people who would say like, no, that's actually a really bad idea. We did actually do that and killed it.
Okay, right.
As of the post-recession.
Okay, so quick project discovery and validation or devalidation. Nice. Okay, let's move on to how do you estimate a timeline for new projects? And so what's critical in the timeline? So estimating value you uncover, we've talked about that a bit, and it's hard. And estimating a timeline is hard. Anders, you're not going to go first this time because you've no doubt got some nice self-organizing answers there. Who else has had to go through this loop and try to figure it out? Go on, who's going to go? I could nominate Raphael to speak if no one else is going to speak, because Raphael, you asked questions, you haven't contributed an observation.
You follow. Usually, like iterations, I think is the high-level idea to plan roadmaps, and like trying to think about what is the shortest time frame where you can deliver value, and start from there, and then have increments. Like if it's 6 weeks or 3 weeks, you just add more increments of that, and plan like de-risking in the first one, and then any more risky ideas you plan for the later iterations.
Okay, so yeah, de-risking up front, that's critical. Isaac. I've just got an admin. Isaac. Okay, Isaac's got to drop out because he can't get video to work or unmute. That's unfortunate. That's one side. Sorry, yes, so Raphael, absolutely. Yeah, de-risking early, that's obviously critical. Knowing how much time to spend de-risking is always a difficult one, because the more you do open the box, the more weirdness comes out of the box. And after a while, you've solved 2/3 of the problem, but you've still demoed nothing, and then everyone thinks you're all wasting time. And so showing value during that is difficult. Who else has a method to get through that process? So the de-risking and coming up with a good Isaac, I can see you now. Welcome in. Yeah, who else has a process for getting through that de-risking and then coming up with a convincing timeline when risks are high at the start of a project?
I try and think of it in terms of early exits. If risk is high, then what's the smallest thing that we could do that would give us a good answer to whether or not we should continue going, and then, or either that or would somehow add some value, and then maybe put some numbers to those kind of decision points. Recent project I've been working on is more of kind of like a code migration from some legacy code bases into something more streamlined, and in that case, but then we also wanted to replace at the same time, kind of, it was like forecasting multiple variables, which we think actually we could forecast with one combined variable. So that kind of broke down quite nicely to be, okay, first off, we know that we can replace the code base and that has some value. So let's definitely do that because that's a low risk part. We have a good, a good gut feeling that replacing these 4 forecasts with 1 forecast should be better, because it means 1 source of error as opposed to 4. But let's deliver the bit that we know first before we kind of do that part.
Okay, so using gut feel to help guide some of that.
I suppose in the sense that, well, that was more of the risky part in a sense. So we don't know for sure, right? So the decision there was, okay, well, do the bit that definitely has value, it's low risk, and then But I mean, it was nice that the project kind of divided itself into it that way.
So Isaac, the question I've asked is, how do you estimate a timeline for new projects and what's critical in this? And maybe you've got something to contribute. For me, one point that I always make with teams is, let's make sure we buy some goodwill with the managers, because if we can demonstrate something that's working and we've shown some progress, that's so much better than being 3 months in with a de-risking operation and just saying, but the data's so dirty, I've just got to keep cleaning the data, and the management have seen nothing, and they're just watching the money trickle out and no value coming back in. So showing some value early on, even if it's just automating with a form some process that just makes something tick over and makes somebody's life happier. If that does the job, brilliant, you bought some goodwill, and then you've got some more latitude to go and try a few more things. Isaac, I don't know if you've got a point to make on that. You unmuted just then. I don't want to put you on the spot if you haven't.
Yeah, no, I think this actually ties into the first two questions we were talking about, because the biggest challenge I think we deal with, Isaac's left, by the way, I do data science consulting, mostly for large nonprofits and NGOs with driven data. I think the biggest problem we usually have is that you don't really know what's possible until you get into the data and you seriously work with it and try some different things. And a lot of times that's when you figure out whether something's likely to work or not. And then it takes quite a while to figure out how to actually make it ready for real use. And so if you're in an organization, you might have the ability to just poke around, like you might already have access to internal data, or you might be familiar enough with it to understand if things are likely to pay off. But if you're a consultant, if you're outside, you usually can't sell like just an engagement where you poke around. I mean, you may be able to. A gold standard would be you have multiple phases and there's a longish phase that has enough time, in weeks and not hours or days, where you can do this floor to ceiling inventory of data and try to match that up with pain points and elicit that, and do a little bit of poking around before you get into the real project. But if you can't do that, I think Tom's point that you can have a decision gate gives you an early out, so you don't have to, you can set up a longish project with an initial discovery phase, but then just say, hey, we'll present what we've learned. Worst case scenario, you learn something about your data and what maybe you aren't capturing now that you should be if you want something to work in the future. And then say, hey, no, if at this point it doesn't look possible, we'll give you some feedback on how to make this possible a year from now or something like that. And we'll just hit pause or whatever, work on something else. But I think after that, when you're trying to figure out what timeline might work, I go back to this framework for data science that Joe Blitzstein developed for the Harvard CS 109 course on data science. And instead of like a waterfall of functional requirements and then building and then testing and this and that, there are arrows down about defining the problem and R&D and working on it and coming with a solution, and arrows back up. But the most important thing, if you have a project that needs to last 2 months and no longer, or however many engineer hours and no more, is you have to get things into the final shape such that everything actually works end to end, and then you can go back and make things better. So if you get to a point where you can't deliver what you have and you've run out of time, that's a failure, and everyone will feel like it's a failure. But if you have a thing that works, except that right now it's human in the loop and it's not quite as accurate as it could be, but if we do another sprint with some more advanced algorithms or we get better data, maybe we can improve it, that's a good story. So I think you have to just time bound, say we're going to spend 2 weeks on literature review and that's it. We can't make this into a PhD dissertation and spend years on it. And then we'll get some software working so we can see the results, even if the phase before that isn't an algorithm, it's just a dummy, so that you can show something on the page. Then you make it a logistic regression. Then you see if you get better data, you can make the algorithm better. So I think if you time bound things and then make sure that you just get stuff in a form that can be delivered, even if it's not ready yet, then you can triage with them and make it, we're going to get together every week or 2 weeks or whatever, and we'll decide together what part to go back to. So it's a joint decision and not just all the pressure on you to figure out how to make things work.
So Isaac, I love that description. And I've not come across the Joe Blitzstein presentation or link or whatever. Could you possibly dig it up and share it there? And if not, I'll ask you on email afterwards.
Paste the link.
If you can paste it into chat, that'd be amazing. Anders, you're probably going to say that this is how your organization works with your fancy agile processes.
Yeah, I'm the weird agile uncle. Yeah, I mean, basically, it is. I agree with most of your points in the sense that you have to deliver value early for every sprint. That's what you're demoing for. You start, as I mentioned, very simple. But the other thing is that you can usually find value even in data cleaning, especially if you're in an organization, because if you're in that value stream and you need that data for your potential model down the line, it means you can probably use the data for something else. Like you mentioned, like helping fill out the form. There's tons of workflow processes where being able to add some data to that workflow will just makes it better. So you can actually generate value through the data cleaning and not have to have this like big upfront time where you're not delivering anything. So sometimes also just by finding clever ways to use that for value and to show that value every time, right? It doesn't have to be millions, but even showing like, oh, we're saving $10 an hour, that adds up if you can do it after 1 week. And then, yeah, if you can bring in your fancy deep learning stuff later, that can add a couple extra % to those $10.
Has anyone here on the call had good luck using like AutoML as part of this strategy of like either iterating through projects quickly or getting to MVP quickly, as you know, to Isaac's point, right? Like, has anyone tried that and have you been successful in it? Seeing blanks.
I find, Lauren, that's often the problem for projects we work on, no matter what industry it's in or what the subject matter is, like vision or NLP, whatever. The problem isn't usually that you have all the data you need and you need to figure out what the best type of parameters are or something. It's typically something so much further up the pipeline, like just basic data, finding proxies or problems with the things that are in the data, understanding what they mean, especially if they're misleading, or if like they switched data systems a year ago. There are things that prevent you from even getting to the point where you're like, what you really want to figure out is whether, you know, some type of decision boosting model is better or you need deep learning. It's like basic data quality and things like that. So it often feels like one of the ways to provide early value is just working on the problem at all. I mean, it's usually the case that people we talk to, they don't have 100 software developers working on it and they need this special sauce that only you can provide. It's that they're doing it the way they've done it that's painful to them and no one's working on it. So even if you end up doing something really basic, like just expert elicitation and not even machine learning, that's some work they have on this problem and insights that they didn't have before. So I think kind of selling like the process of discovery of what data do we have and not have, what do we need, how we're assuming there's a human in the loop and you're not doing high frequency trading, like how do we show things to you in a better way so that even if it sucks today, how are we collecting the right data so that we can then retrain later and 6 months from now, do it again and have better results?
Yeah, no, I quite agree with all of that. During I gave a talk at PyDataLondon on like 15 years of failed projects, so you don't have to make the mistakes that I made, and some successes in there. And part of that was rather than thinking about a data science project with machine learning and stats and then an output, it was just think big picture, find the puzzle, figure out what the steps are to solve the puzzle, and then solve the puzzle. And that might include data science and machine learning, or it might just be, hey, I've got to go and get the data and write the right form and make the right histogram, and then that delivers enough value for the business to get on with its job. And then, as you say, you come back in a year's time and then it's time to automate bits of that process or augment the data or whatever else. I think there's a lot of value to be had in using the early discovery data to help a team just make better decisions, draw the right diagrams to demonstrate that you understand their problems, so get some mutual buy-in, and show them where the weirdness in their data is and where the good stuff in their data is, help them find the outliers. The outliers could be bad data entry processes or weird customers doing odd things that somebody ought to know about. Just something to demonstrate that you actually understand the data and you're doing something useful in there. And then Laura, I think on the other side of that, when it comes to AutoML, I keep selling the idea of AutoML in lots of teams, and then we look around to see where we could put it in and actually justify its usage. it just never fits. I think, as Isaac said, it just doesn't do the right job. It doesn't flush out the underlying problem. It just lets you crunch the data that you've got, and getting that data, it's either trivially easy and it's the wrong data, or the data's full of lies and you don't know it yet, or the data that you actually need isn't in the database, and that's where the value is, and you've got to go and do the hard work to find that data. So AutoML, it's a bit like Data Robot. Everyone gets excited by Data Robot. Bosses sign off big contracts on Data Robot. And Data Robot's lovely if everything else is lined up and you just want to get another increment of performance out of your system. If that's not the place that you're in, and almost all teams are not in that place, then what does Data Robot give me? It doesn't solve the other 90% of my problems.
So I largely agree.
Oh.
The one place that I've seen that it's a little bit helpful is you can oftentimes surface leaks very quickly from the feature. Just if your model performs way too well right out of the box, you might know that your data is messy in a way that you didn't know about, right? Like perhaps
okay, so it's a good negative case.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Perhaps you have an address in the data, your snapshot data, but only customers, right, that actually buy something give you their address, right? So that's a leak. You can't use it.
Yeah.
So a little bit on the data exploration side, but yeah, I was wondering if anyone prototyped, but this is largely in line with my understanding of where AutoML fits in.
I have used AutoML on my own projects to look at the pipelines that come out the other side and the features that are generated to help create new features. That feels like a valuable process. But again, you've got to have the data and you've got to understand the problem that you're solving. And that feels like 90% of the work for me anyway, before you get to that point. Has anyone, hands up, used AutoML, had their team use AutoML, even just invested time using it? Okay. All right. And then Maxime and Anders, what value did you get out of it? Was there much value?
Actually, none. We tried, but as mentioned, it was it's actually the process. The problem of using AutoML is usually you want something, you expect that you're just going to give data and it's going to give results. And the main issue is that you don't prepare the data, you don't dig into your data, you don't understand them. And I'm almost sure AutoML would work great if you investigate the same time in data processing and investigating the data before, then put AutoML when the only problem you have is looking for the right algorithm to solve the issue, but you already spent so much time modeling your data, the problem is already modeled. And that's not the people that are using AutoML today. Most of the people I've seen using AutoML are people just, hey, I just want to do machine learning on some data that I have no clue about. And of course it fails because the issue is not the algorithm. I've never seen, I've seen a few years ago in research more. I had some colleagues working on developing a deep learning algorithm that would develop that would self-develop an architecture to solve an issue in NLP. And that worked, but it was on NLP task. It wasn't text classification, so the task was really identified. You give the text, you get the label output. Not much pre-processing before, so of course the model was able to self-design the architecture that would work the best. But that's the only point where I've seen it work.
Anders, do you have a closing point to make on that, or if not, we'll jump on?
Yeah, basically, we had the same issues as Maxime, and usually it was the juniors. I was a bit strict in the sense that I want you to understand your models. Like hyperparameters have a meaning. I want you to examine the models, and I want to see that, oh, this is your random forest is overfitting or underfitting. So I need to be tuning my, max leaf split entries, whatever parameter it is. You should have a purpose in doing it, and not just because the AutoML people will end up with like entries 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I'm like, well, why is it this number, not 1,000? Doesn't really matter. It turns out it didn't. It was just a fluke. So you can really tell when something's been AutoML to death. So we ended up just not using it all because it would tend to be a crutch.
Raphael, do you have a question on that? Oh, Maxime, go on.
If I may add, one thing also I've been really disappointed about AutoML lately is that you end up having an ensemble of model at the end of the AutoML. So AutoML tries a lot of models and then just create a big ensemble of all of the best model it tried. And I was a bit disappointed of that because probably everybody knows if you put ensemble of models, you almost every time get a better results, but that's not really something you you understand specifically or you can actually explain. So that's a bit, yeah, a bit disappointing of the AutoML methods.
Yeah, quick thought on that. With tabular data, we basically use gradient boosting as AutoML. So we just use XGBoost or LightGBM, throw our data in it, and we say, yeah, that's the best we're going to get if we want to go quickly.
Yeah, there's a nice workout. I'm going to link it in the next newsletter on XGBoost performing best on tabular data in a wide range of benchmarks compared to, say, deep learning. And although you could ensemble and hyperparameter tune to death and whatever to squeeze out another bit of performance, you're getting another 0.5% or something on top of a thing that's probably debuggable, and then it becomes increasingly less debuggable when you start tuning it. And you just want to find that core signal and then do something with it, I think. Let's move on to the last question while we've still got a couple of minutes. I'm going to go with the submitted question. What are some effective ways to run projects based on laggy metrics? So if we don't have a quick feedback loop, we can't immediately see that we're going to get value out of a model, and you've got to run it for 6 months before you might get some value back. How do you do that? How do you convince management to go with that? Who's done that?
I'll step. The ask problem that I was talking about earlier, where we were trying to come up with the price model, like what would be the optimal ask. We actually created an experimentation setup where 5% of the forms are held off and not given any treatment at all. So one, this allows us to evaluate like the model versus nothing, like an A/B split. But it also allows us to have an environment where we can change the parameters and see if we can increase, so for different versions of our model. So just creating that experimentation sort of split out of random form loads allowed us to do it. And so that's something that in the future we'll be able to get the analysis back on and then improve upon. But
okay, so you've got 5% held out, 95% used in experiment, and then you're just going to run it for long enough so that in the end you gather a large enough N that you can actually give yourself some kind of 2-sample test to see if you change something. Right. What was the cell that worked for management to, because I mean, it's incredibly important. You do need a large enough sample to do your A/B test, of course. Everyone wants a smaller sample that they can get quicker, and then management want to sign that off to the 1 week, not the 1 year that you actually need. How did you sign that off with managers?
I think it took like maybe 10 back tests. Like, you know, like it was proven and proven and proven again. Like even when they released it to just a handful of clients. I think maybe the first release was to 1 client. We proved value there. Then we released to 15. So it was an iterative process, having to prove ourselves the entire way that the model worked.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess getting buy-in is one of the critical points there. So Lauren, you just asked if we can talk some more about timeline planning. I'd be happy to stick around for another 5 minutes afterwards if we wanted to go back to that. We'll just talk about this topic for a couple of minutes. If anyone wants to stick around for another 5 minutes, that's cool. And if you need to drop off on the hour, that'll be cool. We'll just talk a bit more about effective ways to run projects based on laggy metrics. I mean, I totally agree that running an A/B test and then gathering the data, doing it the truthful way is the right way to do it. But convincing someone to sign up for a year's experiment and don't change anything in between for a year in your business process, that's a jolly hard ask. How else have you done it? Who's done that? Who's done it with success, apart from Ben?
I mean, another thing that you can do is it's usually the right answer to build some tooling or at least some visualization. So even if you have outputs that are very uncertain or not very good, you can show now what those look like. And so that the story, the narrative is, as the predictions get better, you have more confidence and you can show how that's happening. The other thing is you can also, if you build some tooling, usually people don't know how they're doing currently. So it may be that this team has a number in mind. We need 90% accuracy. But if you look at what they're doing right now, the humans don't even agree that much. So just surfacing some insights, like even if you have very little data, if you run a tree model, what are the feature importances? People don't know this, and it's something that they find interesting and a way to start asking good questions, even if the outputs of the model are not super accurate at this point.
And Laura, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best solution that I've got about how to handle the laggy metrics is like trying to, and I'm not saying that we're necessarily good at this, but this is something that I think is going to work once we get better at it, is like finding proxy metrics. So like never settling for like having to wait 6 months or a year to understand, you know, did customers on average take the right actions that you wanted, but like, is there a shorter term measure of success that's if you see lots of positive movement in something more short term, and then you trust that like the positive signs are still going to be there when you get the final results from your A/B test that you're running to prove the value. Finding those short term metrics is obviously like also really hard, but like that's I don't know if anyone else has had kind of success with that approach, but that's kind of like where my head's at the moment, is that, you know, a good way to kind of like fill the gap until you've got the proper metrics you need.
So I'd love to explore that for another couple of minutes as well. So I'm just going to say, if anyone needs to drop off right now, just raise your hand. And if not, we'll carry on for 5 minutes. Okay, so you've got to drop off. Lauren, in that case, I'm sorry, you wanted to explore the thing, but you've got to drop off. I will summarize the notes for this. We'll go in the next newsletter, which will be in a week's time, I think, and share the video there. Well, yeah, we'll carry on exploring it for a few more minutes now anyway. Thank you very much for joining. They've dropped off. And so, fine, we can carry on talking in that case for another 5 minutes. Has anyone found proxy metrics? Because that's really interesting. I know that I've talked to clients about that. I don't think we've managed to make that work. So I'm curious to if anyone has done proxy metrics that work.
We kind of did something similar in the sense that we did churn models and purchasing propensity models. And on those, you can change the window that you're looking at. So then we would have several windows. And then we could sort of have for the short term, we could use a short term model, which obviously were worse predictions than long term, and of course, the business was interested in long term. So I guess that's kind of like how we use the proxy metric.
I did something similar, I guess, when I built a forecasting model. And so because I'd have to, so the model was predicting the number of clicks on some sites for the next 30 days. So obviously to validate that, I needed to wait 30 days. But I just did I ran the model on a shorter time period and then had like a test set and then estimated how the model did on that, the current month or the previous month, just to have an idea. And then I kept tracking that over time, just building on what Isaac said. I have like a dashboard with the metrics, and then I kept tracking that over time, how the model did for every forecast. And now it's been about 8 months, I think. And I think the business is finally convinced that it works. So now we're expanding it. They're actually going to start using it. But yeah, it did take time. But I think having that test metric there did help a little bit.
Yeah, the tooling part is really important. We built our own platform, so we were able to customize it. So every prediction we made had a unique ID, and that unique ID was for example, in the web server, when they clicked on the banner, we could associate the prediction with the ID. So we could have that live running long tail metric of like every dollar that we made could be shown in real time. Yeah, that it really does matter, like Isaac was saying.
I mean, people are usually willing to wait as long as they can see or interact with something. And so especially if you're using methods that quantify uncertainty, you might have like big bounds, but then they tighten up over time, and that's gratifying. You know, it's like, especially with an A/B test, maybe for a long time you don't see much, but then eventually people have confidence that you'll get there.
I think that's for me, one of the key points is confidence, so trust. If I can expose the way that I'm working and make it clear and get someone else to buy in that, okay, I've got wide uncertainty, I don't really know what this big distribution diagram means, but over time the distribution comes down and I'm saying I'm getting more and more certain, and you can see this coming in, and you can see that things appear to be trending in the right direction. And I flagged early on that as soon as we change the form in the B test, and we keep A as the constant, in the B, everyone will click it more at the beginning just because it's novel. But then once that settles down and the novelty goes away, then we see the true signal. So we ignore the first signal and everyone goes, oh, look, things got better. And then they got worse. Oh, but we understand that. And that trust works through. Even if I've got stupid model behind it. I've just got a simple heuristic with an if then else statement behind it. As long as it's doing the right thing, then we build trust and then we get some progress and then we can go on. So I mean, I totally agree with that. But I've looked at insurance contracts for the year's renewal, and then do you have to wait a year to see if you get to your year's renewal point? And probably you do. Maybe there's a quick metric, which is people will bail within the first month if they're not happy. But then you really have to wait a year to see actually how the economics work out. And there's no real good way of getting past that, I think. But you can do the quick test. Do they bail in a month and ask to cancel their contract early? And if they don't, well, there's 95% chance they're going to stick around for the year, say. So yeah, but I don't have any great answers there. And I think that is another one of those unsolved areas, that reducing risk. I think all of this comes down to reducing risk. I think solving the algorithm is typically not that hard. It's reducing the risk and getting people to buy in that is the difficult thing. All right, we've run over for
actually was
just go on.
poke our bear as well. Yeah, sorry. One other one was to poke the bear a bit. So with our propensity purchase model, we just ranked all our customers by products and then just emailed the top 100. In a benchmark against a regular marketing email. And the fact that we beat the benchmark handily, just it was like a spur of the moment idea, gave us that confidence that the model was actually doing what it was supposed to do.
One thing I'm surprised about is the number of data science teams that aren't allowed to talk to a customer or meet a customer or interact with them, because you've got to be kept at hands or arm's length. And then if you can't see the people that you're dealing with, and like you can't talk to the call center staff who are using the thing that you've built or whatever, then it's your knowledge is fundamentally poor. But you don't understand the process. You really don't understand the process. For me, working in insurance, I went to the Lloyd's of London insurance box with my clients. I walked to the building, went into security, went into this incredibly formal old style insurance thing with little tables, and everyone sits there and people shop around for business. And I saw all the paper films and I was like, oh, now I understand where the data comes into the process, and I can see why there's blotches on it because people spill the ink because it's all weird and old-fashioned processes. And then it turns out it never gets typed into the database, but I can follow the data all the way through, so we understand it. But sorry, that's me digressing. That doesn't help us figure out what our quick metrics are. But we've run over by a bunch of minutes. Do we have any final questions, or should we wrap up there? I think we had some nice examples on those last points. Okay, so I'm going to summarize these notes and then I'll put them into the next newsletter with a link. I'm going to send around an email to follow up with you. I'd like to actually follow up with some short discussions with a couple of you and see what other problems you face, because I want to dig into more topics to develop for these things. So I'll be sending a follow-up email for that. Thank you very much for sticking around for all of this. I'm guessing you're on my newsletter, and if not, I'm going to send you a reminder email when the archive link is up for that post. And if you've got any observations to share on that, that'll be great. There's a PyData Global being planned for December, so that'll be the worldwide virtual Zoom-based PyData Global again, and I'll be running another Executives at PyData, some kind of session, possibly something more formal, possibly a bit of training in there around that. We're playing with ideas. So if you've got feedback on what you would like to see at something like a PyData Global around this topic, hit me up with some feedback and I'll happily noodle on those ideas. Right, thank you very much for attending, and I'll follow up by email with you all. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone, see you
Thank
later.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.